Hi everyone, my name is Renee and today we'll be speaking with Jeffrey Keller, a partner at the San Francisco whistleblower law firm Keller Grover. Today our conversation is about the False Claims Act and how it empowers and protects whistleblowers when they report fraud on the government. So Jeffrey, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the False Claims Act?
Yeah, of course, Renee. The False Claims Act was originally signed into law in 1863 in response to fraud that was occurring during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln was concerned with his troops getting defective products. They were ranging from things like donkeys that were sick and unable to provide support to the troops. So Abraham Lincoln signed into effect this new law, the False Claims Act. And really, a lot of people call the False Claims Act Lincoln's Law because it was such a profound change in the way business was done between the government and its government contractors. And 150 years later, the False Claims Act has become one of the most powerful weapons that the government has in fighting fraud against the government. And it continues to this day to reward whistleblowers with a percentage of whatever the government requires. And more importantly, it provides protections for individuals or entities that come forward and report bad conduct by their companies to ensure that there are protections in place that they aren't retaliated against in their workplace. So really, the False Claims Act has become really one of the most powerful tools for the government in preventing and combating fraud in government contracting in this country.
Well, 150 years later, defense fraud or government fraud is still high on the agenda. Tell us what is defense fraud and how has the False Claims Act helped empower whistleblowers?
Renee, as you can imagine, the defense of our country, the government spends large sums of money in providing for supporting our military, supporting the infrastructure that supports our military. For example, the government is the largest purchaser in this country. And those purchases can range from, for example, like office supply equipment and computers that are used in the Pentagon and maybe used in bases throughout the world, to really even designing, missile-guided systems and armaments that are used by our soldiers, and guns and bullets and bulletproof vests and Kevlar helmets. Really, anything you can imagine that is produced or service provided in this country may actually be used by our military or in support of our military. And those entities or companies that contract with the government to provide those products and services are, potentially open to liability under the False Claims Act if they don't contract with the government fairly and comply with the terms that they've entered into with these government contracts.
Well, who or what types of defense contractors defraud the government?
I've touched on a couple of the different points of the type of, it really, since the government's the largest purchaser in the country, it can really touch on really anything having to do with whether or not the contract was in fact, the company knowingly violated the contract. So the types are really as varied as you can imagine as the products and services that any company in this country can provide. But to give you kind of an idea of how you defraud the government, it may help you sort of identify what types of companies may be involved. One of the major types of government defense contractor fraud really comes to overcharging the government for products and services. Is really one of the main types of frauds that you see. You also see, providing the government, defective or ineffective products. You've seen cases where companies have provided defective bulletproof vests, parts on military aircraft that don't comply with the specs that are designed for that helicopter, not using the right meteorology, not using the right testing. And really, when a company contracts with the government, they've got to follow all the steps that they've agreed to, because the life of our servicemen are at stake, and for purposes of the False Claims Act, every taxpayer dollars that's used to pay for those products are really at part of that part of that contract. So really, if you overcharge the government, you provide the government ineffective products or defective products, you provide the government less quantity than you represented, you underpay what you owe the government. Really, it varies, and since the military spending can touch on every aspect of product or service in this country, that's as varied as you're going to get. It can be any kind of company out there. It could be subject to the False Claims Act for any government contract that they enter into.
Okay. That's interesting. Do state governments defer from federal agencies, or do they?
It's interesting. Because of the success of the Federal False Claims Act, states have begun to mimic and create their own individual state False Claims Act for contracts that the state has, or their political subdivisions. The municipalities, the cities have with contractors provide services that are paid for by the state and state tax dollars. As of 2004, there's 30 states that have enacted False Claims Act laws that are similar to the Federal False Claims Act, as well as the District of Columbia. The program has been so successful with the Federal False Claims Act that different federal agencies have also enacted specialized False Claims Act to deal with specialized issues. For example, the Securities Exchange Commission is dealing with our public financial markets, has laws under the Dodd-Frank amendments that require companies to, publicly disclose information about, things that are that would be important to an investor. And so these laws, again, provide incentives to whistleblowers, provide protections against retaliation for whistleblowers coming forward. And you see that also, for example, with the IRS. They have their own whistleblower program and trying to capture tax cheats. But to do that, they've seen the success with the False Claims Act, and so they effectively reward people who have information about tax cheats. But really, the False Claims Act is one of those statutes that has become such a great weapon in combating fraud and incentivizing people who have the information, that individuals that are at the company or have specialized knowledge can identify companies that are engaged in fraud and defrauding our government. That you've seen this a large dollar recovery that the government has really recovered. And the statistics are really quite astounding. Since 1986, when there were major amendments to the False Claims Act, the government has recovered over $34 billion, and 70% of that came from whistleblowers. About 27 billion of that 34 billion since 1996 has come from leads from whistleblowers. So the False Claims Act has been such a successful and productive weapon for combating fraud that we hope to see, and I encourage any whistleblower to come forward if they have information about their company committing in bad conduct, to really reach out to a whistleblower lawyer before they even talk to their own superiors at the company or go to the government. Whistleblower lawyers are really experienced ones, can really help them make the proper decisions in going forward. So really, this False Claims Act has really become the major #1 weapon in combating government fraud and making sure that every tax dollar that's collected is being used to the fullest extent possible.
Well, Abraham Lincoln, I guess, knew what he was doing 150 years ago.
Yes, he did.
That's tremendous information. To learn more about the False Claims Act or to get help reporting government fraud, contact Keller Grover lawyers at reportgovfraudnow.com or call our whistleblower helpline at 1-866-486-1537. Operators are available 24/7. Or you can learn more about Jeffrey Keller by visiting kellergroverwhistleblowerlawyers.com. I want to thank everyone for participating today, and I invite everyone to come back and hang out next time when we'll be discussing a new and important whistleblower topic. That's all for now, and goodbye.
Thank you, Renee.